The glass shattered like a gunshot in the Montana night, freezing 16-year-old Emma Richardson mid-step as she reached for her grandmother's heart medication. Three shadows moved through the broken window of their isolated farmhouse, thinking they'd found easy prey. An elderly woman and a teenage girl, alone and vulnerable. But predators should always check what's guarding their target. Margaret O'Sullivan's weathered hands found her late husband's shotgun as golden eyes emerged from the darkness behind the intruders, watching, waiting. The largest of the three men raised his weapon, confidence radiating from his voice. "Just give us what we came for, and nobody gets hurt." Emma's breath caught as she recognized the cold calculation in his eyes. This wasn't a random break-in. Shadow, her 4-year-old wolf dog, positioned himself between the strangers and his family, muscles coiled like springs. "You picked the wrong house," Margaret whispered, her finger finding the trigger. What these men didn't know could kill them all. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, the foreclosure notice had arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like the end of the world. Emma Richardson stared at the official document, her 17-year-old hands trembling as she read the cold, bureaucratic language that threatened to destroy everything she had left. 30 days to pay $8,000 in back taxes or lose the only home she'd ever known. "Grandma, we need to talk," Emma had whispered, finding Margaret O'Sullivan hunched over the kitchen table, sorting pills with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to ration hope along with medication. Margaret looked up with eyes that had seen too much. The death of her husband 10 years ago, the loss of her son and daughter-in-law in that terrible car accident, and now the slow erosion of their small family's security. At 75, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who refused to be broken, even as her body betrayed her with a failing heart that required $1,200 worth of medication each month. "I know what you're going to say, honey," Margaret replied, her voice carrying the slight tremor that came with age and worry. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." Emma worked 3 jobs, serving coffee at Miller's Diner before school, stocking shelves at the pet store on weekends, and helping old Mr. Peterson with his cattle after classes. Every dollar went toward keeping their heads above water, but it was never enough. Not for the mortgage, not for Grandma's medicine, not for the dreams Emma harbored of veterinary school that seemed as distant as the stars. The farmhouse had belonged to Emma's great-grandfather, built in 1952 with Montana timber and the sweat of a man who believed in permanence. Now it needed a new roof, new plumbing, and windows that actually kept the cold out. The bank appraised it at $40,000, but Emma knew it was worth everything. Every memory of her parents, every story her grandmother told about the old days, every moment of stability in a life that had seen too much loss. Shadow, her 4-year-old wolf dog hybrid, seemed to sense the family's distress. He'd appeared in their lives when Emma was 12, just weeks after her parents' funeral, a tiny pup abandoned in the woods behind their property. Margaret had initially protested. They couldn't afford another mouth to feed, but Emma had pleaded with the desperation of a child who'd lost too much already. "He needs us, Grandma, just like we need each other." Now Shadow stood nearly 3 feet tall, with the intelligent amber eyes of his wild heritage and the devoted heart of a family guardian. Legally registered as Emma's emotional support animal, he provided comfort that no human could offer, and protection that their isolated location desperately required. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Emma realized that Shadow might be the key to everything, though she had no idea how much danger that realization would bring to their door. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana Valley as Emma Richardson discovered the final foreclosure notice tucked behind the screen door, its red lettering stark against the white paper like dried blood. Her hands shook as she read the words that would haunt her dreams. Final notice, 30 days to vacate. She found Margaret in the kitchen, quietly sorting her heart medication into a weekly pill organizer, her movements deliberate and careful. The older woman looked up with eyes that had learned to hide worry behind gentle smiles, but Emma had grown too familiar with that particular shade of resignation. "Grandma, you're skipping doses again," Emma said, noticing the gaps in the pill organizer. It wasn't a question. Margaret's fingers paused over the small white tablets. "These pills cost more than some people make in a week, sweetheart." "I'm 75 years old. I've had a good run." "Don't you dare." Emma's voice cracked with the weight of too much responsibility for someone not yet 18. "You can't die on me, too. You're all I have left." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken fears and the ticking of the old mantel clock that had belonged to Emma's great-grandfather. Shadow, sensing the tension, padded over and rested his massive head on Margaret's lap, his amber eyes reflecting an intelligence that sometimes seemed almost human. Margaret stroked the wolf dog's thick fur, finding comfort in his steady presence. "Your parents would be so proud of you, Emma. Working 3 jobs, keeping your grades up, taking care of an old woman and this beautiful boy." She scratched behind Shadow's ears, earning a contented rumble from deep in his chest. "It's not enough, though, is it?" Emma sank into the chair across from her grandmother, exhaustion weighing down her shoulders like a physical burden. "I make maybe $800 a month and our expenses are 3 times that. I can't even afford the gas to drive to all my jobs half the time." As if on cue, Shadow's ears perked up, swiveling toward the front of the house. He rose smoothly, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert in an instant. Through the kitchen window, Emma glimpsed a dark sedan parked on the ridge overlooking their property, too far away to see clearly but close enough to feel watched. "Probably just lost tourists," Margaret said, but her voice carried a note of unease that made Emma look at her more closely. Her grandmother had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense trouble, a skill Emma had attributed to decades of living alone in rural Montana. The car disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, but Shadow remained vigilant, pacing between the kitchen and the front door with an urgency that set Emma's nerves on edge. That afternoon brought no relief from their mounting problems. The mail included another stack of medical bills, their amounts climbing into figures that might as well have been telephone numbers for all the reality they held for Emma's family. $1,200 for Margaret's heart medication, $3,000 for the emergency room visit last month, $800 for the specialist in Billings who'd prescribed another round of tests they couldn't afford. Emma sat at her great-grandfather's old oak desk, spreading the bills across its scarred surface like tarot cards predicting disaster. Her parents' life insurance had covered the funeral expenses and not much else. The trust fund they'd mentioned in passing had apparently been tied up in legal complications that their small-town lawyer seemed powerless to resolve. As evening approached, Emma prepared for her shift at Miller's Diner, where she would serve coffee and pie to truckers and ranchers while fighting off advances from men twice her age who saw a pretty girl struggling to make ends meet. The work was honest but soul-crushing, each $5 tip a reminder of how far she had to go and how little time remained. "I'll be back by midnight," Emma told Margaret, who was settling into her favorite armchair with a book and a cup of tea that had grown cold while she worried. "Keep the doors locked, and if Shadow gets restless, call me immediately." Margaret nodded, her fingers absently tracing the spine of a well-worn Bible. "Be careful, honey. I've got a feeling in my bones tonight." Emma paused in the doorway, studying her grandmother's face. Margaret's feelings had an unsettling tendency to prove accurate, a fact that had kept their family safe through various minor crises over the years. Shadow positioned himself at Margaret's feet, his golden eyes tracking Emma's movements with the focused attention of a guardian who took his responsibilities seriously. As Emma drove away in their ancient pickup truck, she caught sight of the same dark sedan in her rearview mirror, following at a distance that seemed both deliberate and menacing. The predators were already circling, though Emma wouldn't understand the true nature of their interest until it was almost too late. The shotgun blast that shattered the night silence sent the three intruders diving for cover behind Emma's great-grandfather's oak dining table. Margaret O'Sullivan stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, the weapon steady in her 75-year-old hands despite the tremor that usually plagued her fingers when sorting pills. "Gentlemen, you picked the wrong house on the wrong night," she announced, her voice carrying an authority that made the largest of the three men reassess his assumptions about easy prey. Marcus Bradley slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving the barrel pointed at his chest. At 42, he'd broken into dozens of homes across 3 states, but something about this elderly woman's composure sent warning signals through his experienced criminal mind. She held that shotgun like someone who'd used it before. "Easy there, Grandma," Marcus said, his voice smooth despite the circumstances. "We're not here to hurt anyone. Just looking for something that belongs to us." "Nothing in this house belongs to you," Margaret replied, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Behind her, Emma appeared in the hallway, her face pale but determined as she took in the scene. Shadow emerged from the shadows like liquid darkness, positioning himself between the intruders and his family with predatory grace. The youngest of the three men, Kyle Martinez, couldn't tear his eyes away from the massive wolf dog. At 19, Kyle had agreed to drive the getaway car to pay for his mother's cancer treatments, but he'd never signed up for this level of danger. Shadow's amber eyes seemed to see straight through to his soul, weighing his intentions and finding them wanting. "That's no ordinary dog," whispered Danny Hoffman, the veterinarian whose gambling debts had forced him into this desperate alliance with Marcus. Danny recognized the intelligent gaze, the perfect bone structure, the way Shadow moved with calculated purpose rather than mere animal instinct. "Marcus, that's a wolf hybrid. Maybe 70% wolf minimum." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized these men weren't random burglars. They'd come for Shadow specifically, and that knowledge filled her with a terror deeper than any concern for her own safety. Marcus smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Smart man, Danny. Yes, we know exactly what we're dealing with here." He turned his attention to Emma, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he'd perfected over years of manipulation. "Emma Richardson, isn't it? 17 years old, 3 part-time jobs, grandmother with a failing heart and no health insurance." "How do you know that?" Emma demanded, instinctively moving closer to Shadow, who remained perfectly still despite the tension radiating from his coiled muscles. "I make it my business to know things," Marcus replied, "especially when those things are worth $50,000 to the right buyer." The number hit Emma like a physical blow. $50,000, enough to save their house, pay Margaret's medical bills, and secure Emma's future education. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. The solution to all their problems stood beside her, breathing steadily and trusting her to protect him as he'd protected her family for 4 years. Margaret's sharp intake of breath drew everyone's attention. "You're talking about my granddaughter's companion animal. He's legally registered, has all his papers, and hasn't harmed so much as a field mouse in his entire life." "Papers can be forged," Marcus said dismissively. "What matters is genetics, and your companion animal has bloodlines that certain collectors find very appealing." He took a small step forward, testing Margaret's resolve. "I'm offering you a way out of your financial problems, Mrs. O'Sullivan. Your granddaughter won't have to work herself to death, and you can afford the medication that keeps your heart beating." "We're not interested," Emma said firmly, though her voice betrayed the internal battle raging between love and desperation. The practical part of her mind calculated quickly. $50,000 would solve everything, while keeping Shadow might cost her the only family she had left. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his conscience warring with his need for money. "Marcus, maybe we should just—" "Should just what?" Marcus snapped. "Leave empty-handed while my buyer sits in a hotel room with a briefcase full of cash?" His mask of reasonable civility began to slip, revealing the predator beneath. "I've got debts to pay and people to answer to. We're not walking away from this score." Danny stepped forward, his veterinary training making him the natural intermediary. "Look, I can examine the animal right here, verify his health and lineage. If he's worth what Marcus says, maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement that benefits everyone." "The only arrangement that benefits everyone," Emma said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is you three leaving our property right now. Shadow isn't for sale at any price." Margaret felt her chest tighten, the familiar warning signs of her heart condition triggered by stress and adrenaline. She'd hidden the severity of her latest diagnosis from Emma, but the cardiologist's words echoed in her mind. "One more major episode, Mrs. O'Sullivan, and we might not be able to help you." Shadow sensed the shift in Margaret's breathing before anyone else noticed. He moved smoothly to her side, pressing his warm bulk against her legs in a gesture of support that demonstrated the deep bond between them. His action didn't go unnoticed by Danny, whose professional eye caught the subtle intelligence in the animal's behavior. "He's monitoring her heart rate," Danny murmured, more to himself than the others. "I've never seen anything like it." Marcus saw opportunity in Margaret's moment of weakness. "Your grandmother's having another episode, isn't she, Emma? How many more can her heart take? My buyer can have that money in your hands within 24 hours. "My grandmother is fine," Emma lied, even as she watched Margaret's face grow pale. The terrible truth was that Marcus had identified their greatest vulnerability. Time was running out for Margaret, and Emma was powerless to stop it. The standoff stretched on, 3 armed men facing an elderly woman and a teenager with a wolf dog whose loyalty could prove either their salvation or their destruction. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of approaching storm clouds and the weight of decisions that would change everything. Shadow's ears swiveled toward the darkness beyond the broken window, his body language shifting subtly. Something else was moving out there in the night, and Emma realized with growing dread that Marcus might not have come alone. The first phase of their ordeal was ending, but Emma sensed that the real test of their family's bonds was just beginning. The luxury black SUV that pulled into their driveway at 12:47 a.m. changed everything. Emma watched through the kitchen window as a woman in an expensive coat emerged from the vehicle, carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. Marcus's entire demeanor shifted from predatory aggression to nervous anticipation. "That's her," he whispered to Danny and Kyle. "Dr. Sarah Chen. She's got the money." Margaret's grip on the shotgun never wavered, but Emma could see the toll the stress was taking on her grandmother's frail heart. The older woman's breathing had become shallow, and a fine sheen of perspiration had appeared on her forehead despite the cool night air. Dr. Chen knocked politely on the front door as if this were a normal business transaction rather than an armed standoff in the middle of the night. Her voice carried through the wood, cultured and professional. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, my name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I believe we have something to discuss regarding your animal companion." "We have nothing to discuss with you," Emma called back, her arm protectively around Shadow's massive neck. The wolf dog remained alert but calm, his intelligence evident in the way he assessed each new development without panic. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, young lady," Dr. Chen replied. "I'm a wildlife preservation scientist, and the animal you're harboring represents something far more significant than a family pet. May I come in? I think you'll find my offer quite generous." Kyle shifted uncomfortably near the overturned dining table, his conscience finally overriding his fear. Marcus, this is wrong. These are good people trying to protect their family. Shut up, Marcus hissed. You need the money for your mother's treatments just as much as I need to settle my debts. He turned to Emma, his voice taking on a falsely sympathetic tone. Look, kid, I get it. You love the animal. But love doesn't pay medical bills or prevent foreclosure. Dr. Chen is offering you $250,000 for what amounts to a very large dog. The number hit Emma like a physical blow. $250,000. It was more money than her family had ever dreamed of possessing, enough to solve every problem that kept her awake at night. She could pay off the house, cover Margaret's medical expenses for years, attend any veterinary school in the country, and still have money left over for emergencies. That's not possible, Emma breathed. But even as she spoke, she could see from Dr. Chen's confident posture that the offer was real. Danny, whose veterinary training allowed him to recognize Shadow's exceptional qualities, spoke up quietly. Emma, animals like Shadow are incredibly rare. If he's got the bloodlines, Dr. Chen thinks he has, he could be worth even more than she's offering. Margaret's voice cut through the tension, weak but determined. Money can't buy everything, young man. Some things aren't for sale. With respect, Mrs. O'Sullivan, Dr. Chen called through the door. This isn't about buying and selling. It's about conservation. Your Shadow could be the key to saving an entire subspecies. His genetics could help restore wolf populations that have been extinct in Montana for decades. Emma felt her world tilting on its axis. The idea that Shadow represented something larger than their family bond had never occurred to her. She remembered finding him as a tiny, abandoned pup, bottle-feeding him through those first crucial weeks, watching him grow into the intelligent, loyal companion who'd become the center of her world. He's not going anywhere, Emma said firmly. But her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. The practical part of her mind was calculating furiously. Margaret's heart condition required increasingly expensive treatments. The foreclosure deadline loomed just weeks away, and Emma's dreams of veterinary school seemed impossible without a financial miracle. Shadow pressed closer to Emma, as if sensing her internal conflict. His amber eyes met hers with a trust so complete it made her chest ache. He'd never asked for anything beyond food, shelter, and love. In return, he'd given them protection, companionship, and a loyalty that transcended species. Margaret's breathing became more labored, and she swayed slightly on her feet. "Emma," she whispered, "I need to sit down." The admission sent panic through Emma's heart. Her grandmother never showed weakness, never asked for help. Danny, despite his compromised position, moved instinctively toward Margaret, his medical training overriding the criminal situation. "Let me help her," Danny said. "I'm a veterinarian, but I know basic human medical care. She needs to reduce her stress levels immediately." Kyle stepped forward as well, his young face earnest with concern. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, please, let Dr. Hoffman check your pulse." Marcus grabbed Kyle's arm roughly. "We're not here to play doctor. We're here to make a deal and get out." "The deal's off if she has a heart attack," Kyle shot back, surprising everyone with his sudden backbone. "My mother's dying of cancer, but I won't be responsible for killing someone else's grandmother." The standoff had become something more complex than a simple robbery. Emma found herself surrounded by conflicting loyalties and impossible choices. Dr. Chen represented legitimate scientific interest and enough money to solve their problems. Danny seemed genuinely concerned about both Margaret's health and Shadow's welfare. Kyle was clearly having second thoughts about the entire enterprise. Only Marcus remained focused on his original predatory intent. "Emma," Margaret gasped, lowering the shotgun slightly. "That medication in my purse, The small bottle. Emma rushed to retrieve Margaret's emergency heart medication, her hands shaking as she recognized the signs of another cardiac episode. Shadow followed closely, his body language shifting to protective mode as he sensed the medical crisis unfolding. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Marcus pressed, seeing opportunity in the family's vulnerability. "Your grandmother needs the best medical care money can buy. My buyer can make that happen tonight." Dr. Chen's voice came through the door again, more urgent now. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, if you're having a medical emergency, please let me help. I have emergency medical training and there's a fully equipped ambulance 20 minutes away." The revelation that Dr. Chen had anticipated the need for medical backup added another layer of complexity to the situation. Emma realized that this wasn't a spontaneous crime, but a carefully planned operation involving multiple parties with different agendas. Danny knelt beside Margaret's chair, checking her pulse with professional efficiency. "Her heart rate is elevated and irregular. She needs immediate medical attention. The nearest hospital is 45 minutes away," Emma said, her voice breaking with fear and exhaustion. "We can't afford an ambulance ride, and our truck might not make it over the mountain roads in the dark." "Dr. Chen's ambulance could be here in 20 minutes, Kyle said quietly. She mentioned it specifically. The implication was clear. Dr. Chen had planned for every contingency, including medical emergencies. The level of preparation suggested resources and connections far beyond those of ordinary wildlife collectors. Shadow moved to Margaret's side, resting his head on her lap in a gesture of comfort that brought tears to Emma's eyes. The wolf dog's behavior demonstrated an emotional intelligence that transcended training or instinct. He was trying to help in the only way he knew how. "He knows she's in trouble," Danny observed. "I've worked with thousands of animals, and I've never seen this level of empathetic response. Emma, Shadow isn't just genetically valuable. He's emotionally evolved in ways that could revolutionize our understanding of animal cognition." The scientific implications of Danny's observation added weight to Dr. Chen's offer. Shadow wasn't just a rare genetic specimen. He was potentially a unique individual whose capabilities could advance wildlife conservation and animal behavior research. Margaret looked up at Emma with eyes that held decades of wisdom and love. "Sweetheart, I've lived 75 years. I've seen your parents die, watched you grow into a remarkable young woman, and loved every day I've had with you and Shadow. But I won't let my old heart be the chain that holds you back from the life you deserve." "Don't talk like that," Emma pleaded. "We'll figure something out. We always do." "Sometimes," Margaret whispered, "love means making the hard choice, even when it breaks your heart." Outside, Dr. Chen waited with the patience of someone who understood that life-changing decisions couldn't be rushed. Her presence represented opportunity, scientific advancement, and financial salvation, but it also meant the potential loss of Shadow, the only family member Emma had never worried about losing. The Montana wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying the scent of approaching snow. Winter was coming early this year, and Emma realized that their family's survival might depend on decisions made in the next few minutes. Shadow looked up at Emma with those impossibly intelligent amber eyes, and for a moment she could swear he understood exactly what was at stake. The moment Dr. Sarah Chen stepped through the doorway, everything Emma thought she knew about the situation crumbled like old bones. The woman wasn't the cold collector Emma had imagined, but someone closer to her mother's age, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of field work rather than boardroom negotiations. "Mrs. O'Sullivan needs immediate medical attention," Dr. Chen announced, dropping her professional briefcase and moving directly to Margaret's side. "I'm not just a wildlife scientist, I'm also a paramedic. May I?" Emma nodded numbly as Dr. Chen checked Margaret's pulse with practiced efficiency, her fingers finding the pressure points with the confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Her heart rhythm is stabilizing, but she needs to get to a hospital within the hour, Dr. Chen said, then looked directly at Emma. The ambulance I mentioned, it's real, and it's already en route. I called them the moment I saw the situation escalating. Marcus stepped forward aggressively, his facade of control finally cracking. That wasn't part of the plan, Chen. We had a deal. The deal was for a healthy animal from a willing seller, Dr. Chen replied coolly, not taking her eyes off Margaret. This is coercion, and I don't work that way. The revelation hit Emma like a thunderbolt. Dr. Chen hadn't been working with Marcus at all. She'd been tracking him, trying to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The pieces began falling into place. The mysterious sedan Emma had noticed, the perfectly timed arrival, the medical backup. "You're not buying Shadow," Emma said, understanding flooding through her. "You're trying to save him." "Among other things, yes," Dr. Chen confirmed. She pulled out a small device that looked like a veterinary scanner and held it near Shadow's neck. The wolf dog remained perfectly still, as if he understood the importance of the moment. "This will confirm what I already suspect about his genetic heritage." The scanner beeped softly, and Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she read the display. "Emma, do you know where your parents found Shadow?" "In the woods behind our house," Emma replied. "He was maybe 3 weeks old, abandoned and starving." "He wasn't abandoned," Dr. Chen said quietly. "His mother was shot by poachers 6 weeks ago. She was the last purebred female of the northern Rocky Mountain wolf subspecies, a line we thought had gone extinct in the 1970s. The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Emma felt the weight of sudden understanding. Shadow wasn't just her beloved companion, he was literally irreplaceable. Danny, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "That's impossible. I've examined Shadow multiple times. He's clearly a hybrid, part wolf, part domestic dog." "You examined him with the assumption he was a hybrid," Dr. Chen corrected. "But look at his bone structure, his behavior patterns, the way he communicates. Shadow is approximately 95% pure wolf, with just enough domestic dog genetics to make him uniquely suited for human companionship." Kyle backed away from the group, his face pale with realization. "Marcus, you told us this was about exotic pet smuggling. You never said anything about extinct species." "Because it doesn't matter," Marcus snarled, pulling a second gun from his jacket. "Extinct or not, he's worth a fortune to my buyers in Asia. They pay premium prices for rare bloodlines." Margaret struggled to sit up straighter, her voice gaining strength from anger. "You're talking about turning him into a breeding machine for profit." "I'm talking about financial survival," Marcus shot back. "You think I enjoy this? My daughter died because of animals like him. A wolf-dog hybrid attacked her at a petting zoo when she was 7. The owners called it socialized and safe, right up until it tore out her throat." The raw pain in Marcus's voice stopped everyone cold. Emma saw the broken father behind the criminal, the grief that had twisted his love for his child into hatred for the very species that represented her loss. "I'm sorry about your daughter," Emma said softly. "But Shadow didn't kill her. He's never hurt anyone in his entire life." "They're all killers waiting for the right moment," Marcus replied, his gun trained on Shadow. "The only good wolf is a dead wolf, but a profitable wolf is almost as good." Dr. Chen slowly reached into her jacket, moving carefully to avoid triggering Marcus's paranoia. "Emma, I need to show you something that changes everything." She pulled out a thick envelope. "These are documents from the federal government. Shadow isn't just genetically important, he's legally protected under the Endangered Species Act." Emma's hands shook as she opened the envelope. The papers inside were official government documents, complete with seals and signatures. Shadow was listed as a critical conservation individual with federal protection status that made harming him a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. More importantly, Dr. Chen continued, the government has authorized a conservation partnership program. You wouldn't lose Shadow. You'd become his official guardian under federal supervision, with a full college scholarship for wildlife management and a monthly stipend of $3,000 for his care. The offer was beyond Emma's wildest dreams. She could keep Shadow, attend veterinary school, and provide for Margaret's medical needs, all while contributing to legitimate conservation efforts. Kyle dropped his weapon entirely. Marcus, this is insane. We're talking about federal charges now. My mom needs me alive, not in prison. Danny nodded agreement. I got into this to pay gambling debts, not to face federal wildlife trafficking charges. I'm out. But Marcus's grief-driven obsession had pushed him beyond rational thought. Nobody's walking away. Too many people know too much. His voice carried the dangerous edge of a man with nothing left to lose. Shadow's body language changed subtly, his muscles coiling with tension that Emma had never seen before. The wolf dog had remained calm through the entire ordeal, but something in Marcus's tone had triggered a deeper, more primal response. "Emma," Margaret whispered, "Shadow's positioning himself to protect us. Whatever happens next, trust him." Dr. Chen caught the shift in dynamics as well. "Mr. Bradley, you're making a mistake that will destroy more than just your life. That animal represents the future of an entire species. Killing him would be ecological genocide." "Good," Marcus replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. One less monster in the world. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air, growing louder by the second. Kyle's face flooded with relief. The ambulance, and probably the police. "Then we end this now," Marcus said, swinging his gun toward Shadow. Emma threw herself between the weapon and her wolf-dog companion, her body shielding Shadow as completely as possible. "If you want to hurt him, you'll have to go through me." Margaret struggled to raise the shotgun again, her arthritic hands finding strength in desperation. "And through me." Danny stepped forward as well, surprising everyone. "And me. I became a veterinarian to save animals, not help kill them." Even Kyle joined the protective circle, his young face set with determination. "My mom raised me better than this. Shadow stays with his family." Marcus found himself facing 5 people, 6, counting Shadow, all willing to risk their lives for each other. The sirens were getting closer, and his window for escape was closing rapidly. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward the broken window. "There are others who want what you have. More people like me who'll never stop hunting him." "Then we'll be ready," Emma replied, her voice carrying a new strength that surprised even herself. "This is our home, and Shadow is our family. We protect our own." Marcus disappeared into the darkness just as red and blue lights began flashing through the trees. The immediate crisis was over, but Emma realized their real challenges were just beginning. Shadow pressed against her side, his warm bulk offering comfort and strength. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family bound by love rather than blood, and united by a loyalty that transcended species. The ambulance lights painted the Montana farmhouse in alternating shades of red and white as paramedics worked frantically over Margaret's still form on the kitchen floor. Emma knelt beside her grandmother, holding a hand that felt as fragile as autumn leaves, watching the woman who'd raised her slip away with each labored breath. "Her heart's in severe arrhythmia," the lead paramedic announced, his voice carrying the professional detachment that healthcare workers use to mask their own fears. "We need to get her to Billings General immediately, but I have to be honest with you, it's going to be touch and go." Emma's world collapsed inward to this single moment of helpless terror. Margaret's face had taken on the waxy pallor that Emma recognized from her parents' final hours in the hospital, that terrible transition from life to whatever came after. Shadow whined softly, pressing his massive head against Margaret's shoulder as if willing his own strength into her failing body. "She can't die," Emma whispered, her voice breaking like glass against stone. "She's all I have left. She promised me she wouldn't leave me alone." Dr. Chen, who had remained quietly in the background during the medical emergency, stepped forward with the kind of gentle authority that suggested experience with family crises. "Emma, your grandmother is a fighter. I can see it in her eyes. She's not ready to let go." But even as Dr. Chen spoke, Margaret's breathing became more shallow, the gaps between breaths stretching longer, until Emma found herself counting seconds in a desperate attempt to measure her grandmother's remaining time on Earth. The sheriff's deputies had arrived shortly after the ambulance, taking statements from Danny and Kyle while maintaining a perimeter around the property. Marcus had vanished into the wilderness like smoke, leaving behind only the destruction of Emma's sense of safety and the terrible knowledge that more men like him existed. "Miss Richardson," Deputy Williams approached with the careful tone law enforcement used when delivering bad news, "we need to discuss your living situation. If Mrs. O'Sullivan doesn't make it through the night, you're a minor without a legal guardian." The words hit Emma like physical blows. In her terror over Margaret's condition, she hadn't considered the legal implications of potentially becoming an orphan at 17. Foster care, social services, the inevitable separation from Shadow that would follow as surely as sunrise. "I'm almost 18, Emma protested weakly. "Just 4 months. 4 months might as well be 4 years in the eyes of the law," Deputy Williams replied with genuine sympathy. "And there's the matter of that wolf dog. State regulations are very specific about exotic animals in foster care situations." Shadow, as if understanding that his own fate hung in the balance, moved closer to Emma's side. His amber eyes reflected the ambulance lights, creating an ethereal glow that reminded everyone present of his wild heritage. He'd been calm throughout the night's violence, but now his body language suggested barely contained anxiety. Dr. Chen pulled Emma aside as the paramedics prepared to transport Margaret. There might be another option. The federal conservation program I mentioned includes provisions for emergency guardianship situations. If you're willing to sign the partnership agreement, I can have Federal Social Services recognize me as your temporary guardian pending your 18th birthday." "You don't even know me," Emma said, suspicious of what seemed like an impossibly convenient solution. "I knew your parents," Dr. Chen replied quietly, her words stopping Emma's heart mid-beat. "They were the field researchers who first identified Shadow's mother as a pure-blood northern Rocky Mountain wolf. They died protecting information that could have led poachers directly to her den." The revelation rewrote everything Emma thought she understood about her parents' death. The car accident that had claimed their lives suddenly took on sinister dimensions, suggesting they had been murdered for trying to protect creatures like Shadow. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Emma's voice carried 4 years of grief and anger that had been building since she first became an orphan. "Because your parents made me promise to keep you safe by keeping you ignorant," Dr. Chen explained. "They knew that knowledge would make you a target. But circumstances have changed. Marcus knows where you are, and there will be others like him." Margaret's eyes fluttered open suddenly, her consciousness returning with the stubborn determination that had defined her entire life. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of medical equipment and radio chatter. Emma leaned close, desperate to catch every word. "I'm here, Grandma. Save your strength." "Listen to me." Margaret's grip on Emma's hand tightened with surprising force. "The safety deposit box at First Montana Bank. Key is taped under the kitchen drawer. Everything you need to know about your parents, about Shadow, about why we've been hiding. Grandma, you're scaring me. Margaret's eyes found Shadow, and her expression softened with a love that transcended species. He's not just a wolf, honey. He's the last bridge between the world we lost and the world we're trying to save. Promise me you won't let them take him. I promise, Emma said, tears streaming down her face as she felt Margaret's hand growing cold in hers. And promise me you'll trust Dr. Chen. She's been protecting us longer than you know. The paramedics intervened then, loading Margaret onto the stretcher with practiced efficiency that spoke of too many similar emergencies. Emma climbed into the ambulance without being asked, unwilling to be separated from the last person who connected her to everything she'd lost. Shadow tried to follow, but the paramedics blocked his path. "Ma'am, we can't allow animals in the ambulance." "He goes where I go," Emma said with a finality that surprised everyone present. "He's not just an animal. He's family." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "I'll drive Shadow to the hospital myself. He'll be there when you arrive." As the ambulance pulled away from the farmhouse, Emma watched through the rear window as her childhood home disappeared into darkness. Shadow stood in the driveway, his silhouette backlit by the remaining emergency vehicles, and Emma realized that this might be the last time she ever saw either her grandmother or her wolf dog alive. The 45-minute drive to Billings General Hospital felt like traveling through purgatory. Margaret's condition continued to deteriorate despite the paramedics' best efforts, her heart stopping twice during the journey and requiring electrical resuscitation. Each time the defibrillator charged, Emma felt her own heart breaking a little more. "She's coding again," the paramedic announced as they pulled into the hospital's emergency bay, and Emma's world reduced to the terrible sound of the flatline alarm that meant everything she loved was slipping away. The emergency room doors swallowed Margaret's stretcher, leaving Emma alone in the waiting area with nothing but fear and the growing certainty that she was about to lose the last anchor to her old life. The Federal Conservation Program, Dr. Chen's guardianship offer, even Shadow's genetic importance. None of it mattered if Margaret died and left Emma completely alone. Dr. Chen arrived 30 minutes later with Shadow on a leash, the wolf dog's distress evident in every line of his powerful body. He'd never been separated from Emma during a crisis before, and his anxiety mirrored her own in ways that reminded everyone present of their deep emotional bond. "Any word?" Dr. Chen asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Emma. "She's been in surgery for an hour," Emma replied, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "They won't tell me anything because I'm not technically family." "That's about to change," Dr. Chen said, pulling out her phone. "I've been in contact with Federal Social Services. If you're willing to sign the emergency guardianship papers, I can make medical decisions on your behalf until you turn 18. Emma looked at Shadow, who was resting his head on her lap with the patient devotion that had sustained her through 4 years of loss and uncertainty. The wolf dog's presence reminded her that some bonds transcended legal definitions of family. "What happens to Shadow if I don't sign?" "He becomes property of the state, probably euthanized within 48 hours as a potentially dangerous exotic animal." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Emma signed the papers as Margaret fought for her life somewhere beyond the surgical doors, binding her fate to a stranger who promised safety in exchange for trust she wasn't sure she could afford to give. At 3:47 a.m., as Margaret O'Sullivan lay unconscious in the intensive care unit with machines monitoring every heartbeat, Emma Richardson discovered that everything she'd believed about her life was built on carefully constructed lies designed to protect her from a truth too dangerous to know. The safety deposit box key had been exactly where Margaret promised, taped beneath the kitchen drawer with the kind of paranoid precision that spoke of years spent looking over one's shoulder. Dr. Chen had insisted they retrieve it immediately, driving Emma back to the farmhouse while Shadow rode silently in the back seat, his amber eyes reflecting the dashboard lights like twin beacons of concern. "Your grandmother was FBI," Dr. Chen explained as they pulled into the bank parking lot at dawn, her voice carrying the weight of secrets finally being revealed. Not just any FBI agent, she was part of an elite wildlife protection unit that operated in deep cover for over 20 years. Emma fumbled with the small brass key, her hands shaking from exhaustion and emotional overload. "That's impossible. Grandma worked as a school secretary her whole life." "That was her cover identity," Dr. Chen replied gently. "Margaret Sullivan, not O'Sullivan as she's been calling herself, was one of the most effective undercover agents the Bureau ever had. She infiltrated wildlife trafficking rings across the western United States, gathering intelligence that led to dozens of arrests and the recovery of hundreds of endangered animals." The safety deposit box opened to reveal a treasure trove of documents that rewrote Emma's understanding of her entire family history. FBI credentials bearing Margaret's photograph, but a different name. Commendations signed by directors Emma recognized from television news. And most shocking of all, a thick file labeled Operation Sanctuary that contained photographs of her parents in FBI uniforms she'd never seen them wear. "Mom and Dad were agents too?" Emma whispered, staring at a picture of her mother pinning a tracking collar on a wolf that looked remarkably similar to Shadow. "The best the Bureau had," Dr. Chen confirmed. "They specialized in genetic conservation, working to preserve bloodlines of endangered species before they vanished forever. Your father was a field biologist, your mother was a geneticist. Together they identified and protected the last breeding populations of wolves, bears, and wildcats throughout the Rocky Mountain region." Emma's hands trembled as she read through reports detailing her parents' final mission. They hadn't died in a random car accident. They'd been murdered by a wildlife trafficking syndicate that had discovered their true identities. The accident had been staged to look natural, but FBI investigators had found evidence of sabotage that pointed to professional killers. "The car crash was meant to look like they lost control on a mountain curve," Dr. Chen explained, her voice thick with emotion. "But your father was one of the best drivers the Bureau had. He wouldn't have made the mistakes that supposedly caused their deaths." A photograph near the bottom of the file showed Emma's parents standing beside a wolf enclosure, beaming with pride as they held a tiny pup that was unmistakably Shadow. The date stamp indicated the picture had been taken just 2 weeks before their deaths. Shadow wasn't found abandoned in the woods, Emma realized, the pieces of her fabricated childhood finally clicking into place. They brought him home to protect him. "Your parents died getting Shadow to safety," Dr. Chen confirmed. "The trafficking syndicate was planning to capture his mother and sell her entire bloodline to private collectors in Asia. When your parents interfered, they became targets themselves." Emma felt her world reconstruct itself around this new reality. Every memory of her childhood now carried double meaning. Margaret's paranoid security measures, her insistence on homeschooling Emma until high school, the way she'd always known exactly what to do in emergency situations, even the isolated location of their farmhouse suddenly made sense as a deliberate choice rather than family tradition. "Why are you telling me this now?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because Marcus Bradley wasn't working alone," Dr. Chen replied grimly. "He's part of the same syndicate that killed your parents. They've been searching for Shadow for 4 years, following every lead and paying informants throughout Montana. Someone finally gave them your location." The implications sent ice through Emma's veins. If the syndicate had found them once, they would find them again. Margaret's heart attack had left Emma more vulnerable than ever, and Shadow's genetic importance made him a target worth millions of dollars to the right buyers. "There's more," Dr. Chen continued, pulling out a sealed envelope marked with Emma's name and her father's handwriting. "Your parents left this for you, with instructions that you should only read it if their cover was blown and your safety was compromised." Emma's hands shook as she opened the letter, recognizing her father's careful script and her mother's delicate annotations in the margins. The words blurred through her tears as she read their final message. "Our dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and we're no longer there to protect you. We pray that Margaret has kept you safe, and that Shadow has grown into the magnificent creature we knew he would become. You must understand that everything we did, every lie we told, every secret we kept, was done out of love for you and for the future of species that cannot speak for themselves. Shadow is not just a wolf, Emma. He carries the genetic legacy of his entire subspecies, and his bloodline may be the only hope for restoring wild wolf populations throughout the Rocky Mountains. But more than that, he is your brother in every way that matters. We saw how he bonded with you from the moment we brought him home, and we knew that you two were meant to be together. If our enemies have found you, then you have a choice to make. You can disappear into federal protection, living safe but hidden lives under assumed identities. Or you can stand and fight, using Shadow's genetic importance as leverage to demand the resources and protection you need to live freely. Either choice requires courage we know you possess. We love you beyond words, and we trust you to make the right decision for both yourself and Shadow. Remember that families are not defined by blood alone, but by the bonds we choose to honor. Take care of each other, and know that we will always be proud of the young woman you've become." Emma finished reading through tears that felt like they might never stop falling. Her parents had known they were going to die, had accepted it as the price of protecting both their daughter and an irreplaceable piece of the natural world. The weight of their sacrifice settled on her shoulders like a mantle she wasn't sure she was strong enough to bear. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen checked her watch, then looked toward the hospital where Margaret lay, fighting for her life. "Now we make the same choice your parents made. Do we run and hide, or do we stand and fight?" Shadow, who had been lying quietly in the back seat throughout the revelations, suddenly raised his head and uttered a low growl that made both women freeze. His ears swiveled toward the street, and Emma followed his gaze to see a black sedan parked at the far end of the block, its tinted windows preventing her from seeing who was inside. "They're watching us," Dr. Chen said quietly, her hand moving instinctively toward the concealed weapon Emma now realized she'd been carrying all night. "The question is, how long they've been there, and what they're planning to do about it." Emma looked at Shadow, whose intelligent eyes met hers with complete trust and unwavering loyalty. In that moment, she understood what her parents had meant about families defined by choice rather than blood. Shadow wasn't just her pet or even her companion. He was her brother, her protector, and her responsibility. "We fight," Emma said, her voice gaining strength from the decision. "My parents died protecting him, and Grandma nearly died the same way. I won't dishonor their sacrifice by running away." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "That's what I hoped you'd say. But you need to understand what fighting means. The federal conservation program isn't just about protecting Shadow. It's about using his genetic importance to dismantle the entire trafficking network that killed your parents. You'd be working with the FBI, using yourself and Shadow as bait to draw out the people responsible." The sedan's engine started, and Emma watched it pull away from the curb with deliberate slowness, its occupants making sure she knew she'd been observed. The message was clear. They could find her anywhere, any time they chose. "Then let's give them something to find," Emma said, her fear transforming into the kind of cold determination that had made her parents legendary within the FBI. But we do it on our terms, with our rules, and we make sure they pay for what they took from our family." Shadow pressed against her leg, offering silent support for whatever decision she made. Together, they would face whatever came next, not as victims, but as guardians of something precious enough to die for and important enough to live for. 1 month later, Margaret O'Sullivan stood in the kitchen of their renovated farmhouse, her movements careful but steady as she prepared Sunday dinner for a family that had grown in ways she never could have imagined. The heart surgery had left her weaker in body, but somehow stronger in spirit, and the knowledge that she no longer had to carry decades of secrets alone had lifted a burden from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been bearing. "Emma, honey, would you call Kyle in from the barn?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had been given an unexpected second chance at happiness. "And tell him to bring those wildflowers he's been fussing over all morning." Kyle Williams, no longer the frightened 19-year-old getaway driver, but a young man who had discovered his calling in wildlife rehabilitation, had become an integral part of their unusual household. His mother's successful cancer treatment, funded by the Federal Witness Protection Program, had given him a new lease on life and a determination to make amends for his past mistakes. Emma smiled as she watched Shadow through the kitchen window, playing with 3 wolf pups in the specially constructed enclosure that now occupied half their backyard. The conservation breeding program had exceeded everyone's expectations, with Shadow proving to be not just genetically valuable, but an exceptionally devoted father who demonstrated remarkable intelligence in teaching his offspring. "He's teaching them to hunt mice," Emma observed, marveling at Shadow's patience as he demonstrated proper stalking techniques to pups who were more interested in tumbling over each other than learning survival skills. "Dr. Chen says she's never seen parental behavior this sophisticated in any carnivore species." Margaret joined her at the window, her hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder, in the casual gesture of affection that had become more frequent since her brush with death. "Your parents would be so proud of what you've accomplished, sweetheart. Not just with Shadow, but with yourself." Emma had grown into her role as a federal wildlife consultant with surprising grace, balancing her final year of high school with online courses from the University of Montana's prestigious veterinary program. The full scholarship Dr. Chen had arranged was just the beginning. Emma now worked directly with FBI wildlife protection units, using her unique bond with Shadow to help train other conservation animals and their handlers. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," Emma admitted, watching as Shadow gently corrected one of his sons who was being too rough with his sister. "A year ago, we were facing foreclosure and had no idea how we'd pay for your medication. Now we're part of something that could actually save an entire species." The transformation of their property had been remarkable. Federal conservation grants had funded not just the wolf enclosures, but also extensive renovations to the farmhouse, solar panels that made them energy independent, and a state-of-the-art veterinary clinic where Emma gained hands-on experience under Dr. Chen's supervision. The house that had once represented financial desperation now served as a model for human-wildlife coexistence that attracted researchers from around the world. Kyle burst through the back door with his arms full of wildflowers, his face flushed with the enthusiasm he brought to everything since discovering his gift for working with rescued animals. "Mrs. O, you should see what the pups did today. They figured out how to open the gate latch." Shadow taught them problem-solving skills that most domestic dogs never develop. "That's wonderful, dear," Margaret replied, accepting the flowers with the indulgent smile she reserved for the young people who had become her surrogate grandchildren. Kyle's transformation from criminal accomplice to dedicated conservationist had been one of the unexpected joys of their new life. Dr. Chen arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, as she had every Sunday for the past month. carrying a bottle of wine and the latest updates on the federal investigation that had grown out of their encounter with Marcus Bradley. She had evolved from Emma's emergency guardian into something approaching a family member, filling the role of mentor and friend that Emma hadn't realized she'd been missing. The prosecution team is confident they have enough evidence to bring down the entire trafficking network, Dr. Chen announced as they gathered around the dinner table that Margaret had extended to accommodate their growing household. Marcus's cooperation has been invaluable, especially after he learned that his daughter's death wasn't actually caused by a wolf dog attack. Emma looked up from serving the roast, her heart clenching with sympathy for a man whose grief had driven him to become their enemy. What really happened to her? Negligence at the petting zoo, Dr. Chen replied sadly. The animal that attacked her was a poorly socialized domestic dog that had been mislabeled as a wolf hybrid to attract customers. Marcus spent 5 years hating the wrong species and targeting innocent animals like Shadow. The revelation had broken something inside Marcus Bradley, leading to his complete cooperation with federal investigators and a guilty plea that would likely result in a reduced sentence. His testimony had already led to the arrests of 17 people involved in international wildlife trafficking, including the syndicate members who had murdered Emma's parents. He wants to meet Shadow, Dr. Chen continued. Part of his therapy involves confronting his irrational fear of wolves. His psychiatrist thinks seeing Shadow's gentle nature might help him process his daughter's death more healthily. Margaret set down her fork, considering the request with the wisdom that came from decades of law enforcement experience. What do you think, Emma? It's your decision. Emma looked through the window at Shadow, who was lying peacefully in the evening sun while his 3 pups climbed all over him like living playground equipment. His patience with the young wolves demonstrated a capacity for nurturing that completely contradicted Marcus's perception of wolves as mindless killers. I think healing has to start somewhere, Emma said finally. If seeing Shadow can help Marcus find peace, then that's what we should do, but only if Kyle agrees to be there too. Marcus needs to see how his actions affected someone else whose mother was sick. Kyle nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the responsibility. I'd like that. Maybe if I can show him that people can change, he'll believe he can change too. As they finished dinner, the conversation turned to future plans. Emma would start her veterinary residency at Montana State University in the fall, specializing in wildlife genetics and conservation medicine. Kyle had been accepted into a federal training program for wildlife rehabilitation specialists. Even Margaret had found new purpose as a consultant for FBI undercover operations, her decades of experience proving invaluable in training younger agents. The pups will be ready for placement with other conservation families in 6 months, Dr. Chen reported. We have applications from wildlife preserves in Wyoming, Idaho, and Colorado. Shadow's bloodline will be distributed across the Rocky Mountain region, creating a genetic network that could support wild population restoration within a decade. Emma felt a bittersweet mixture of pride and sadness. Watching Shadow's children grow up and eventually leave to start their own families would be difficult, but she understood that their departure represented hope for the future of their species. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Emma stepped outside to spend a few quiet moments with Shadow and his pups. The wolf dog approached her with the same gentle dignity he'd possessed since puppyhood, and Emma realized that their bond had only deepened through all the changes their family had experienced. "We did it, boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears in the spot that always made him lean into her touch. "We kept our promises to each other, and we built something beautiful." Shadow's amber eyes reflected the porch light as he gazed up at her with the complete trust and love that had sustained them through their darkest moments. Together, they had found their way from desperation to hope, from loss to family, from fear to a future worth fighting for. The Christmas lights twinkled across the Montana Valley like earthbound stars, casting a warm glow over the farmhouse that had become the heart of an extraordinary family. Emma Richardson, now 19 and in her second year of veterinary school, stood at the kitchen window watching her grandmother Margaret dance slowly with Kyle Williams, the former criminal who had become the grandson Margaret never expected to have. In the living room, Dr. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the floor, laughing as Shadow's now-grown pups climbed over her like furry mountains. The three young wolves had returned home for the holidays from their respective conservation posts across the Rocky Mountain states, bringing with them stories of successful breeding programs and wild pack integrations that exceeded every scientific prediction. "Emma, honey, come help me with the gravy," Margaret called, her voice stronger than it had been in years. The heart surgery had given her a new lease on life, but Emma suspected that having a house full of people to love and worry about had contributed even more to her grandmother's remarkable recovery. As Emma stirred the gravy, she marveled at how completely their lives had transformed. The farmhouse that had once represented financial desperation now buzzed with purpose and joy. Federal conservation grants had funded not just the wolf facilities, but also a state-of-the-art veterinary clinic where Emma completed her practical training under Dr. Chen's guidance. More importantly, the house had become a refuge for second chances. Kyle had overcome his criminal past to become a respected wildlife rehabilitator. Dr. Chen had found the family she'd never had time to create, and Margaret had discovered that love could bloom at any age. "Remember when we thought we might lose everything?" Margaret asked, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom that came from surviving genuine hardship and emerging stronger on the other side. Emma nodded, her throat tightening with gratitude for the miracle of their survival. "I was so scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of losing Shadow. Scared of being alone in the world. Fear has a way of making us forget our own strength," Margaret replied, pulling Emma into a hug that smelled of flower and lavender perfume. "But sometimes the things we're most afraid of losing are exactly what teach us how to fight." The front door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and the boisterous laughter of Marcus Bradley, the man who had once threatened everything they held dear and was now an unlikely family friend. His transformation from bitter enemy to devoted ally remained one of the most remarkable aspects of their story. Therapy had helped him process his daughter's death and recognize that his hatred of wolves had been misdirected grief that nearly destroyed innocent lives. "Sorry I'm late," Marcus announced, stamping snow off his boots and carrying packages that suggested he'd spent considerable time and thought on Christmas gifts. "The roads are terrible, and I stopped to help a family whose car had slid into a ditch." The Marcus who stood in their entryway bore little resemblance to the desperate criminal who had broken into their home 18 months earlier. Regular therapy, combined with volunteer work at a wolf sanctuary, had restored his capacity for compassion and given him a new purpose in life. His relationship with Shadow had evolved from terrified hostility to genuine affection, though he still maintained a healthy respect for the wolf dog's wild heritage. "Shadow, come here, boy," Marcus called, and the magnificent animal trotted over with the easy confidence of a creature who knew he was beloved. Marcus had learned to read Shadow's body language, understanding that the wolf dog's calm acceptance represented a form of forgiveness that transcended human concepts of justice. Emma watched this interaction with continued amazement. The man who had once planned to sell Shadow to illegal collectors now worked tirelessly to protect other wolves from the same fate. His insider knowledge of trafficking networks had proven invaluable to federal investigators, leading to dozens of arrests and the rescue of hundreds of endangered animals. "I have news," Dr. Chen announced as they gathered around the dinner table that had been extended twice to accommodate their growing family. The federal review of the Northern Rocky Mountain Wolf Restoration Program has exceeded all expectations. Shadow's bloodline has successfully established breeding populations in 4 states, and genetic diversity has increased by 40% in just 18 months. Kyle raised his glass of sparkling cider in a toast. To Shadow, the father of a new generation. To second chances, Margaret added, her eyes finding Marcus with the gentle acceptance that had helped heal his wounded soul. To families that choose each other, Emma contributed, looking around the table at faces that represented every form of love except the one she'd been born into. As they shared stories and passed dishes around the table, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. Her parents' sacrifice had initially seemed like a senseless tragedy, but their work lived on through Shadow's offspring and the conservation programs that now protected countless other endangered species. Margaret's decades of undercover FBI work had finally found its ultimate purpose in safeguarding the future of an entire subspecies. Even Marcus's criminal past had served a purpose, providing him with the knowledge and contacts necessary to dismantle the very networks he had once served. "Emma," Dr. Chen said during a lull in conversation, "I have something for you." She pulled out an official-looking envelope bearing the seal of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Emma's hands trembled as she opened the document, her eyes widening as she read the official designation. "In recognition of extraordinary service to wildlife conservation and species preservation, Emma Richardson is hereby appointed as the youngest regional conservation coordinator in department history." The appointment came with a substantial salary increase, federal benefits that would cover Margaret's medical expenses for life, and the authority to oversee conservation programs across the entire Rocky Mountain region. More importantly, it represented official recognition of Emma's unique abilities and the invaluable role she played in bridging the gap between human and animal communities. "This means you can complete your veterinary degree while working full-time for the government," Dr. Chen explained. "You'll be setting policy for wildlife protection across 6 states, and your work with Shadow has already become the model for human-animal partnerships in conservation programs nationwide." Margaret's eyes filled with tears of pride. "Your parents would be so proud, sweetheart. You've turned their sacrifice into something beautiful." As the evening progressed, Emma found herself on the front porch with Shadow, watching the northern lights dance across the Montana sky in sheets of green and gold. The wolf dog rested his massive head on her lap, his contentment evident in the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We've come a long way from that scared girl and orphaned pup, haven't we, boy?" Emma whispered, running her fingers through Shadow's thick winter coat. Shadow's amber eyes reflected the aurora's glow, and Emma could swear she saw understanding in their depths. Not just animal intelligence, but something approaching wisdom. He had learned to be gentle with Marcus despite past threats, patient with his exuberant offspring, and protective of their extended family without aggression. In becoming the patriarch of a new wolf population, he had also become the emotional center of a human family bound together by love rather than blood. The sound of laughter from inside the house drew Emma's attention back to the warmth and light of home. Through the window, she could see Margaret teaching Kyle to waltz while Dr. Chen and Marcus engaged in animated conversation about upcoming conservation projects. This was what her parents had died protecting, not just Shadow's genetic heritage, but the possibility of a world where humans and animals could coexist in mutual respect and understanding. "Thank you," Emma whispered to the stars, knowing somehow that her parents could hear her gratitude across whatever divide separated the living from the dead. "Thank you for giving me the strength to fight for what matters. And thank you for showing me that families are built on love, not just genetics." Shadow's contented rumble vibrated against her leg, and Emma realized that happiness wasn't just an emotion. It was a choice they made every day to protect what they loved, to trust in each other's goodness, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest fears. Emma's story reminds us that when we think we're losing everything, we might actually be discovering what truly matters: the unbreakable bonds of chosen family, the courage to fight for those we love, and the wisdom to recognize that second chances can come at any age. In a world that often feels divided, her journey with Shadow proves that love transcends species, forgiveness heals even the deepest wounds, and that the families we choose can be stronger than the ones we're born into. Like Margaret finding love again at 75, or Marcus transforming from enemy to friend, we're never too old to start over, never too set in our ways to change, and never too alone to build new connections that give our lives meaning. What second chances are you hoping for in your own life? Have you ever experienced the healing power of an unexpected friendship or found family in unlikely places? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.